Hey everybody, welcome back to EDC-ed Stuff. Today we're starting a new series here on the channel. I EDC'd blank for a certain amount of time. I think 2 weeks is what I'm going to make kind of the standard. The very first knife in this video is an assisted opening knife. We're going to be focusing on assisted opening. So, before we get right into the video, I want to talk a little bit about my thought process behind this series, and the rules, I guess you could call them. So, this series kind of came to me because I wanted to make videos about highlighting certain aspects of different knives, trying out different types of knives, and seeing how they work for my personal EDC. And so, this episode being about an assisted knife is just that. It's going to be me EDCing an assisted opening knife for 2 weeks. This series is not about this knife in particular necessarily. This is the Kershaw Payout. This is just focusing on the assisted opening feature of the knife. This video isn't going to be focusing on the blade performance, the fit and finish, or anything like that. This is all about that one specific feature. And so that's what this series is going to be. Zoning in on one specific feature of a knife, or I guess you could even call it a genre of knives, and seeing how it works in a real-world environment. The next video I plan to do in this series is EDCing a fully serrated knife with my Demco 80-20.5 shark's foot, which is fully serrated. But, assisted opening. So, 2 weeks. I must say, this is kind of a weird thing for someone who's trying to be a knife reviewer to do, because typically, I'll carry a lot of different knives throughout a week. Usually, I said this before, I do not review a knife until I feel like I've carried it enough to do a review, but that varies. Sometimes I might carry it all week, sometimes I might carry it one day, then another day, and then a full week later, and then review it. Sometimes I might carry it, just a few times. It just depends on how long it takes me to figure the knife out. With this video, I am committing to this knife. I'm committing to it. And I must admit, I did not do my 2 weeks consecutively. I did 1 week and then took a break for a little bit and then did another week. But at the end of the day, we have 2 weeks done with this guy. And I'm pretty excited about it. There are some things to talk about here. So, without further ado, let's get right into it. What is an assisted opening knife? Pretty much what it sounds like. It's a knife that opens with an assist. In the case of this knife here, this is Kershaw's spring-safe assist technology, which was invented by Ken Onion. In fact, I think SpeedSafe is the OG assisted system, and there's a lot of other assisted knives that are kind of based off of that technology. But what it is we have a spring in here, a little torsion bar, that has a little hook that goes into the blade, and it coils up here. And when I start to open the knife by pushing the flipper tab, it reaches a point where the spring takes over and opens the knife the rest of the way. This is opposed to something like a manual knife, where there's ball bearings in the pivot. There's no mechanism opening it. It's just a detent, the position of the flipper tab, and the pivot construction. And you can see the difference there. That knife can close like that, while this knife, when I unlock it, it meets pressure here. And that's the spring. When we push past that, it resets the spring like that. So, non-automatic knife, an automatic knife would be kind of the same idea, except you don't have to interact with the blade to open the knife. You could push a button, a switch, something like that. So, I have EDC'd assisted opening knives before, especially back before I got into the hobby. I carried a lot of assisted opening knives. As a teenager, I loved assisted opening knives. But, I've kind of moved on. And I feel like a lot of people in the knife world have. Why is that? It's because now you can get a flip without having to rely on a spring. It feels classy. It has kind of a reputation that precedes it that makes it feel a little bit special, a little bit fancy. Especially since assisted opening knives are becoming very, very popular in the very low knife tiers. I feel like a lot of knife enthusiasts, just to feel a little bit better, like the manual opening, which I do too. I do like manual opening. And I will say this, not all assists are made the same. Kershaw's Speed Safe is a very good assist. There are a lot of assists out there that are junk, absolute garbage, blah. But Speed Safe is one that I do enjoy. It's tried and true, and it did work pretty well for me. So, I kind of thought I knew what to expect going into this video. I thought I'd say, you know, basically, it works, but, you know, it's not like, it doesn't feel as good as a manual opening knife. But, there were a few interesting things that I kind of discovered. So, let's go ahead and get into this. I did try and take some footage of me actually using the knife, but sometimes it's a little bit hard when you're right in the middle of work to set up your phone and take out your knife and cut something and then put everything away and take your phone down. And so I did not get as much real life footage as I wanted to, but hopefully I got some other stuff to fill in the gaps. Let's get to it. So as I was carrying the Kershaw payout, the thing that kept occurring to me was, is it really easier to use an assisted knife with gloves than other types of knives? And so I started testing that. And I've already got some notes taken, but we're going to demonstrate it here for you guys. So, all right. Actually, first off, I want to start with, whoops, don't bump my camera. This knife here. This is the Kubi KU322. It has a good flipping action. Very, very nice flipping action. Flip, 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 flip. Very snappy. That was a reverse flip, not a flip, but ball bearings, great shaped flipper tab. Fires out really nicely. Love that knife. However, when I'm wearing gloves and I try using this knife, we encounter some issues, because even the best gloves do decrease your dexterity. And so sometimes when you flip a knife, you want to make sure your finger gets flipped and then gets out of the way. Right? With gloves, sometimes your finger gets out of the way, but the end of the glove doesn't. So I did it that time. Talk about that in a second. But sometimes what you end up doing is just the glove just runs behind the flipper tab and you lose all your momentum. One way to offset this is to hold the knife upside down when you open it, which you can do. But overall, I'm going to give the opening on a ball bearing flipper I think a C. We're going to give it a C. We're doing letter grades. So this is also a liner lock. Let's talk about that. There we go. Liner locks suck with gloves. Again, this does vary from knife to knife because of lock bar access that you may or may not be granted, but generally, the best way to do it, unless you have the earliest detent ball in the world, two-handed is going to be the way to go. You can it's hard to do it with one hand, especially if you're working, you're right in the middle of things. That's just not something you want to have to be bothered with. So the closing, we're going to give a D. We're going to give a D. Okay. Or actually, we're going to give the closing a C. We're going to go C's all around on that guy because the two-handed closing is not bad. So the next thing I kind of want to talk about was frame locks. Sorry, I'm getting real close to the camera here. I have all my knives set up behind there. So this is the Wii Minax, and I realized this was kind of a bad example to bring because the detent on this knife is a little bit light, and so what happens with frame locks when you're wearing gloves is you tend to put pressure on the lock bar. And on this knife, it doesn't really matter that much because it strengthens the detent and gives it a better flip. But I should have brought a different version. However, you know, you can do it. And as you can see, I am actually unlocking it a lot easier. I don't know why, but I found this to be the case. I use a bunch of different frame locks, a bunch of different liner locks, and I found that on average, frame locks were just easier to close with gloves. Not the best, but definitely easier. And this reverse flick, pretty good with this knife. Yeah, so closing on this one is actually really good. You can use this knife completely one-hand. Well, you can use it one-handed easier than a liner lock. So we're going to give the frame lock a B for opening because, again, you can put pressure on the lock bar. And we're going to give it a B for closing, too, because it is really nice to close. So let's go ahead and take a look at our assisted flipper knife. Here we go. This is a frame lock, as you can see. So, you do not miss a flip. Right there, I'm not sure if you could tell, but that was kind of a lazy flip because my glove got in the way of the flipper tab. It drug with the flipper tab. However, the blade still deployed. And as you can see, this knife functions very well on the close. It's assisted. Again, usually two-handed. However, I can, if I really wanted to, close this knife with one hand. It's a little more awkward, and it increases the chance of you dropping it in the snow, and you don't want to drop your knife in the snow, because that's no good. But, you're never going to miss a flip. So the opening on this gets an A. 100%, no questions asked, it gets an A. The closing, I'm going to give a B. You can do it one-handed. You can. Assisted knives are typically viewed as two-hand closers, which I did there, and just pretend there's another glove on this hand. I'm not putting a glove on this hand because I want to be able to work the camera and stuff, but I mean, that's perfectly functional. In fact, if you really want to, you do the old, you know, close a blade on your leg trick. Don't stab yourself. But yeah, the assisted opening works completely, flawlessly with gloves. You're not going to miss a flip because of that spring. And as far as closing goes, it's easy. You can do it. So let's talk about some other lock types because why not, right? Why not? All right, so the next style of knife that I want to talk about is one that has been a favorite of the working man for years and years, and that is a backlock, shown here on this Cold Steel Recon 1. And we're also going to be talking about thumb studs. So, how do thumb studs work with gloves? Flawlessly. Very easily. Thumb studs are my favorite way to go when I'm using gloves. I'll say that right now. I think thumb studs are one of, if not the very best opening methods to use with gloves. The other thing that you can see here too is on knives such as this is I can actually flick it if I really wanted to. So that's cool. Honestly, gloves don't really get in the way too much of the type of motion and the momentum that you need to slow roll or flick a thumb stud knife. How do backlocks work? They're very accessible with gloves. Again, it is kind of two-handed, which you might consider to be a negative. However, a lot of backlocks you can actually do one-handed. The thing I like about backlocks is you have a large contact area for your thumb. Even with gloves, you can find it and press it, and you're good to go. And on knives like cold steels, it's good to wear a glove so when that blade comes down, it don't chop your finger off. But yeah, thumb studs are fantastic. And opening gets an A. The back lock gets a, well, you know, a knife like this gets A's all around. Thumb studs, A. Back lock, A. Fantastic. The next knife I want to talk about, let's stick with the thumb stud theme. I want to talk about axis locks. This is a Benchmade bug out. So, opening. Again, it's a thumb stud. It works very well with gloves. I almost did it there. We get an, well, we're going to give it a B for opening just because of some things we'll talk about here in a little bit. The axis lock itself. I used to carry a 940 all the time around the ranch. And what I started doing to close it was actually turning it like this and holding it with this hand, resting the blade in the crook of my hand here, and pushing the axis lock as I folded the blade. Because honestly, I've gotten better at it since I've been practicing this. And this will vary from knife to knife. For example, the Adamas, I imagine it's a lot easier to do this with. But even though I'm doing this pretty well right here, I'm focusing on it a lot. And if I'm out feeding cows, I'm cutting hay bales, you know, I have my knife out, I use it, and I just want to get it back in my pocket. In the heat of things, yeah, I can't really do it one-handed if I'm like focusing on other things. If I divert all my attention to closing it one-handed, kind of. For the axis lock, let me look at my notes here. What did I say? For the axis lock, we're going to be on the opening, and the reason I say that is because I've had axis lock knives where you'll get like hay or gunk behind the axis lock, then you open your knife, it's like, and then you have to like blow it out and shake it and smack it on your hand, and then ta-da, it's open. But I mean, that's not a huge issue, so we're going to give it a B for opening. And for closing, we're going to give it a C. Not really the best. Okay, so next, let's go on to my favorite opening method after thumb studs, and that's the Spidey hole. I love the Spidey hole for working with gloves. Oh, man. If you want to slow roll, very easy to slow roll. If you want to flick it, very easy to flick it. If you want to Spidey flick it, Spidey flick away, buddy. So yeah, love the Spidey hole. It definitely gets an A. If you're wearing gloves a lot, the Spidey hole is a fantastic deployment option. It works amazingly well with gloves. Now let's talk about the compression lock. I hate the compression lock with gloves. I hate it. It's terrible. Honestly, it's just terrible. Again, if I was wearing 2 pairs of gloves, this would be really hard to do. The best way to do it with gloves is usually when I'm using my axis lock knife, or my axis lock compression lock knife, I use it, get my cut done, and then all I have to do is move my finger back to the compression lock, and oh, it worked that time. Let's see if I can do that again. Ugh. What I do when I'm wearing gloves is when I stop using the knife, I'll actually have to move my fingers all the way back here, and instead of coming at it, how to explain this? If this is the compression lock bar and my hand is my finger, when I'm using it without gloves, I can come in like this way, but with gloves, I have to reorient so my finger's coming this way. I hope that makes sense to you guys. I hope that makes sense, but the other thing, too, is you don't have a whole lot of space back there, and so when your gloves bunch up in there, it's just, it's not good. Maybe if I had one of those things made by OCD for EDC, the little, I think they're called CMEs, Compression Lock Made Easy. I think that's what they're called, but maybe if I had one of those on here, it'd be a little bit better, but just stock compression lock gets an F with gloves, in my opinion. If you want to get a spider coat, because, again, the thumb hole is amazing. I would definitely recommend something like the well, like I've had a Resilience that I use quite a bit, and it's a liner lock, but it has quite a bit of cutout, and it's not terrible to use with gloves. But I mean, if you're, especially something that I do a lot, because I carry Spyderco's to work a lot, and I'll make my cut, and then I'll just set it down, do what I was going to do, and then pick it up when I'm done with the job and close it. Which, you know, whatever. Okay, next thing I want to talk about, let's talk about this real quick. Let's talk about front flippers. This is the Petrified Fish Beluga. I do not recommend a front flipper if you're going to be wearing gloves. They're just not very intuitive. This is also a liner lock. That's also just kind of difficult to work. Front flippers, what did I give front flippers? Look at my notes. Yeah, I gave front flippers a C. Because technically you can do it, but it's not intuitive, in my opinion. So that's why. I will say, though, talking about the Petrified Fish Beluga, that middle finger flick with gloves, I'll be honest, this is actually a pretty great knife with gloves. Very big, fits in your hand. You can get some work done with this. And that reverse flick off the fuller, we're not talking about fullers, though, but still, that just amazes me a lot. Alright, so let's wrap this up. We've only got 3 more to talk about. First, we're actually going to talk about this guy here. Slip joints. Specifically, traditional slip joints. Not very good if you just have to rely on a nail nick. We're talking D or F territory, depending on the knife. Closing, honestly, though, I'm going to give a B because, yeah, closing a slip joint with gloves is no big problem. But I personally wouldn't recommend it. Unless you have a slip joint with a properly tuned pool or it has lots of room to grab the blade, you don't have to rely on a nail nick, I would probably recommend going with something else if you're wearing gloves. Okay, next up, let's talk about the Scorpion Lock, designed by Andrew Demko. If you've been watching this channel for any length of time, you know I love the AD-15. This is probably my most used pocket knife, and I use it a lot with gloves because it is just so easy to do the, I mean, as you can see there, flick it open. Feels great in the hand. The opening on this definitely gets an A. You know, you saw me there, I flicked it open. We'll keep the closing a surprise for a second. Can you do a slow roll? Because you can do a slow roll. And how's the close? So basically the way the Scorpion Lock works is this big spring here that you guys have probably seen a Scorpion Lock before. But with one hand, with gloves, yeah, you can do it. There's one that's a little easier to do. We'll get to it here in a second. But the one-hand functionality of the Scorpion Lock is great with gloves. And if you're going to use 2 hands, which, again, there's nothing wrong with using 2 hands, it's even better. Very easy knife to use. Great. I mean, for me at least, it's tried and true. And, yeah, pretty good. So, it's going to get an A all the way around. Very easy knife to use with gloves. Very satisfying. And, yeah. Sexy, sexy knife. And the last thing... Hey, leave those goats alone, dog! And the last thing we're going to talk about is also from the Demkos. It's the Shark Lock. Seen here on the AD-20.5. Anyways, I mean, you can see here with the glove, I am doing it completely one-handed, very easily. This gets above an A, I think. This gets an S. fantastic, very easy to use with gloves. Really, really great. Big fan of that. So, yeah. Now, before I close up right here, for just a second, I want to talk about a knife that works exceptionally well with gloves. And that is a CGRB Feldspar. This knife works very well with gloves. This is a very intuitive knife to use. It has thumb studs, which I love, and it is a liner lock, but there's a lot of access to that lock bar, and I don't know, it works good. I mean, you can see here, it just works really well. However, there is one big reason why I would actually choose to have an assisted knife over this one. And we'll talk about that in just a second. So as I established, this knife, the CGRB Feldspar, works equally as good in gloves or better than this knife does, the assisted payout. However, working in gloves isn't the only advantage an assisted knife gives you. This knife works really well in gloves because I think it's a thumb stud knife. The access to the liner is really good, and there's no flipper tab to bounce the blade back up with. However, the reason that I would still prefer this knife in certain cases comes down to the pivot construction. This knife is running on bearings, and this knife is running on washers. So, why does that matter? I'm about to lose sunlight. The reason that matters is because of dust and grime and all kinds of other nasty things that you don't want in your knife. A lot of the time when I was using this knife, it was in dirty, grimy, dusty environments. And something a lot of people don't talk about when you're discussing knife maintenance or keeping your knife clean, grit and grime, is when you're working in a dirty environment, dirt gets in your pocket. Your knife isn't just in danger when it's in your hand being used. While it's in your pocket is, in my opinion, even worse, because dust, dirt, in my case, hay is getting down in there, and it's gumming up your knife. With a knife that's running on bearings, it's a lot easier for gunk to negatively impact the action. This knife is on washers, so there's no gaps between the blade and the pivot assembly. And that spring, if there's anything gunking up your blade, that spring will power through it. So that's one of the reasons that I would still prefer an assisted knife over this knife in certain situations. Another thing with bearings, if you get like hard rocks in your pivot, let's say you get a little tiny piece of quartz, which is a very hard mineral, inside your pivot, there's a chance that you could damage the bearings themselves. I have actually put dents in steel bearings, and I've actually cracked ceramic bearings. Very hard, I don't know exactly how it happened, but damage like that can happen. And so if you're worried about that, an assisted knife might be the way to go. Again, there's other knives that have washers instead of bearings that you can use, which I use a lot of, and for hard use, I do prefer washers. Hard use or dirty use, I do prefer washers. But, if you also need that easy, one-handed, absolutely will not fail opening, an assisted knife running on washers is going to be very hard to beat. So that's really, really great. Another thing you can talk about if we're talking hard use, washers can be more stable in the pivot than bearings if you're putting certain types of pressures on your blade. I honestly haven't tested that super hard. Maybe one day I will, but that is one thing that you can keep in mind, I guess. But yeah, there we go. And then we'll bring out the Feldspar, give him some love, screen time. The sun's about to go down, so I'm going to head inside. Alright, so now that you've seen all of that, let's go ahead and talk about my thoughts and impressions. Where did I put that knife? There it is. After carrying an assisted knife for 2 weeks. I'll be honest with you guys, as far as utility goes, it didn't bother me at all. Not one little bit. And in fact, there were some definite advantages. So, besides the working on the wrench, stuff that I showed you guys where I talked a lot about gloves, I talked a lot about dirt resistance. We'll get back to all of that. But as far as just regular EDC, having it in my pocket in case I needed to cut open a package, cut some tape, a string, something like that, this really worked fantastic. I had no issues with it. It was a blade in my pocket. I pulled it out, opened it, got my cut done, and it went back to my pocket. From a just completely utilitarian perspective, there was no difference between carrying this and carrying a manual knife. Yeah, as far as getting it out of my pocket to use it, it was really, really nice. Yeah, again, this isn't going to be about this knife in particular. This knife will be getting a full-on review later. I'll give you guys a little bit of a spoiler. It's a good knife. I enjoy this knife quite a bit. But the assist, for me, didn't feel like it was holding me back in any meaningful way. Closing it one-handed is definitely a little bit harder than a ball-bearing knife or something like that, but it wasn't something that annoyed me to no end. Cut, or open, cut, back in the pocket. It was good. For tasks where I had to have my knife out for a long time especially, it just didn't bother me. Open the knife, break down cardboard, put it aside, do something, pick the knife up again, break down cardboard. When the job is done, fold it up, and you're done. So let's talk about some of the other advantages. I talked a lot about using it with gloves, and everything I said holds true. Flippers, assisted flippers are a great thing to use when you're wearing gloves. I don't have my... Where did I put my gloves? I should grab them real quick. I'm back. So, what I was going to say is, working with gloves always introduces some kind of compromise. You lose a lot of dexterity. These gloves here, these are my favorite type of gloves to wear. These ones just happen to be made by Still. And these are my favorite types of gloves to wear because they're tough here, and I feel like I get a lot of dexterity. However, there are some sacrifices. Don't get a whole lot of protection on my fingers back here because, you know, it's nylon instead of leather. In fact, I have a video where testing a glass breaker. I was wearing these gloves and I cut right through my glove into my finger. So that's a compromise. And they're not as warm as fully insulated gloves. But it's a compromise I'm willing to make because I do get dexterity. However, a lot of compromises also have to be made with your knife. As I talked about, even though these gloves provide a lot of dexterity, more than certain other gloves, some knives are just difficult to use with them. An assisted flipper is not one of them. I can get this knife out of my pocket and get to deploy 100% efficiently and accurately all the time. I don't have to worry about a misfire. I don't have to worry about not getting the blade out all the way and having to wrist flick it out or something. It works really good. And again, there are other things that work very well. That didn't work good. The shark lock is great with gloves. Blade holes are great with gloves, and thumb studs are great with gloves. That's really, really cool. But this works really good too. And especially if we're talking about ease of acquiring something, this is a lot easier to get than one of these. So if you're someone who works with gloves a lot, an assisted flipper knife is absolutely a viable option. I did talk a little bit about the frame lock. I do think an assisted opening frame lock is a very good combo, but you know, that comes down to the closing, and you know, everyone's a little bit different. But with gloves, assisted opening flipper works very, very well. The other thing I appreciate about this is that you get a good, solid flipping knife that runs on washers. It's possible to do that. I have a steel wheel Modus. Should have brought it out here with me. I didn't, because I'm an idiot. Great knife. Absolutely fantastic knife. It's a flipper on washers. You have to tune the detent very well, and a lot of times, flippers with washers can be a little bit hit or miss. If you get a good one, that's great. If you get a bad one, that's bad. With an assist, you don't have to worry about that. So why would you want washers? Talked about it a little bit already. Protect your knife against dirt and grime. Flippers, especially ball bearing flippers with dirt and hay, like I was working in a lot, getting in here, no good. It will gum up, it'll mess you up, you will not be able to deploy the knife effectively. With this, you have a lot more protection. I did have one case with this knife where I got some gunk, something caught in here, and basically what it did was it got between the blade and the stop pin and caused the knife not to open up all the way. It wasn't quite locked up, but it still wasn't a huge problem because with the assist, it opened up to about there. Again, didn't really lock up, but the flipper tab kept me safe when I was using it. That's the other thing too. If you're getting grime in here on your knife, I talked about this, when the knife is in your pocket, it's very susceptible to things getting down in there. An assist will push the blade right through that, no problem. So that's definitely a huge benefit. While I was talking to other people, while I was doing this video, I have a problem saying the word while. I say it a lot. It's weird. But I was talking to other people, and a lot of people brought up some things that I hadn't really thought of before, such as the fact that assisted opening knives are actually great for people who have maybe lost some motor skill in their fingers, maybe have really, really bad arthritis, and they still need a working knife. Older people, because a flipper tab on a manual flipper requires you to get your finger out of the way pretty quick in order to get the momentum you need. If your hand isn't that strong, or if you have problems moving your fingers really well, this knife has too good of a detent, but it can get a little bit challenging, especially if you're in the heat of a moment. You're working. For me, you're feeding cows. They're coming, they're nudging you, and they're jostling you. You're trying to get this hay off the back of the truck. It's good to have something where when you pull that flipper tab, a blade is going to be in your hand. And then two-hand closing isn't really a big deal for people that have hands that maybe don't work as good as they used to, because two-handing is not that big of a deal. So yeah, in my experience, there are a lot of benefits to an assist. If you need a knife to deploy without any issue, you need it to be ready to go without worrying about making sure you're flipping it right or whatever. An assist is great. If you're working with gloves, an assist is great. If you're working in a dirty, grimy environment, an assist is great. And then for just regular EDC, I didn't feel like it had too much of a negative impact. So why do knife enthusiasts, including myself, oftentimes go, an assist? Oh, it's assisted. Ugh. I think it really comes down to fidget factor. This isn't very fidgety. I talked to some other people and they're saying, well, what about one-hand closing? You can one-hand close an assisted knife just fine. Most assists close one-handedly just fine. They are not, as easy to close one-handed as... But, for me at least, again, this is my own experience, if I really need to make a cut and then get my knife down so I can have two hands again, for me, it's no big deal to make the cut, put the knife down somewhere safe, do two hands, come back, and then close it. And two-hand closing is not a bad thing. It's actually pretty safe. if you're working, you don't want to cut yourself on the job. And so, for me, a lot of times, even if I have a knife that I can close one-handed, if I'm seriously working, I will take the time to two-hand close it just to make sure I don't cut myself. Because there's nothing worse than inconveniencing yourself in the middle of a job. Nothing worse than that. You know, if you hate doing the job, you'll hate doing it handicapped. You'll hate doing it twice. That kind of idea. So, fidget factor. If you're looking for fidget factor, which, come on, all of us love fidget factor. I love fidget factor. A lot. Yeah. The manual blade is just better. And in a lot of situations, a manual blade will get the job done. It will deploy, you will cut stuff, and it'll be good. In fact, this knife here, I was just using it over in the barn to cut open some straw bales so I could restraw some stalls. Wasn't really my plan. I went to town earlier today, and this was in my pocket as kind of a fancy carry. And I got home, and our goats were kidding, and we had a mess, and there was water leaking through the barn, so I didn't have time to grab another knife, but yeah, this worked. Cutting those strings on the straw bales, it worked. However, if I'm going to work, if I'm going to go out and I'm going to feed cows, and after that I'm going to go work on the well, I'm going to be cutting tape. Maybe after that I'm going to go work on, I don't know, an irrigation ditch, going to cut some irrigation tarp. Going to be working in the barn again. Having a knife on washers gives me a little bit of peace of mind. If I drop this in the dirt, there's a high chance it's going to be more okay than if I drop this in the dirt, you know? So, here's what I'm going to end this video on. After EDCing an assisted opening knife, what are my thoughts? My thoughts are that an assisted opening knife definitely has its place in the knife world today. I've heard people say, oh, you know, we don't need assisted knives anymore when we have finely tuned detents and stuff. I disagree. I do think there is still a place for assisted opening knives, 100%. And I feel like assisted opening knives, outside of hard use or tactical or things like that, which I did not talk about tactical uses in this video because that's not my world. I'll let someone else address that. But even as just an EDC knife, the assist didn't really hold me back at all. So it's a good system. And honestly, if you see a knife and you love the design, you just love it, and it's assisted, CRKT, you know, don't be afraid to pick it up. Being able to de-assist something is also a beautiful thing, I'll say that. But, you know, don't be afraid. Do I want all of my knives to be assisted? No. No, no, no. And in fact, for work knives, I've said this before, flippers aren't my favorite for a work knife. I do prefer thumb studs, so I like things like the Rats are really good for work knives. A lot of cold steel stuff. I love my 4MAX Scout, my 80-20 point, or my 80-15, you know, my Recon 1, things like that. Those are going to be my go-to hard-use knives. But assists totally have a place. They totally have a place. And in fact, there were a lot of times where I valued that flipper over the thumb studs. I didn't really talk about this, but sometimes, you know, when you pull your knife out of your pocket, sometimes your finger is just right in the good spot to hit that flipper. So I do appreciate that very, very much. Assisted opening knives have a place, guys. And that's going to wrap up the first episode of I EDC'd blank for 2 weeks. I hope you guys enjoyed. I am going to be making more videos in this series. Again, like I said, I'm going to be EDCing, making a video all about the fully serrated shark's foot 80-15. Should have brought that out here, but I didn't. So that's going to be a video to look forward to. And here's the last thing I want to say. I challenge other channels to do these type of videos too. I don't know how many channels will get word of this, but I would like to see other people's experiences. Heck, I would like to see other channels do an assisted opening knife, and if they come to a different conclusion than I did, I would love to see that. I think this would be a great thing for the community to kind of, explore different genres of a knife in depth. I know it's kind of a risky theme, because if you're a knife reviewer, you have a lot of knives coming in, you got to get through them all, but I think it'll be fun. I will put together a playlist of course, this video, all the ones I make, and if anyone else in the community does a video of this type, I'll also put it in that playlist, so we can have them all in one spot. And if anyone has any questions about, oh, is an assisted knife right for me? They can go there. Oh, is a fully serrated knife right for me? There you go. Is a ball bearing flipper right for me? Someone can make a video about, EDCing a ball bearing flipper for 2 weeks. I think it'll be really, really good. This knife here, the Kershaw Payout, review will be coming sometime. It's January while I'm filming this. So with my pre-recorded content schedule, the review probably won't be out until March. But this video, I'll try and get out before that, before the review. The knife itself is really good. This video was only focusing on the assisted feature, but this knife is a knife that I really do like quite a bit. It's a good knife. In fact, I think it's pretty underrated, but lots of good stuff to like here. And, oh, one more thing. I don't think I said this at the beginning. One of the rules I didn't talk about. Maybe I'll put this at the beginning with the rules. I don't know. But this does not have to be the knife you use for everything. For example, if you're cooking Thanksgiving dinner and you're working on EDC-ed a case peanut for 2 weeks, you are free to use kitchen knives for that task. I used kitchen knives while I was EDCing this. This was just my EDC knife, like I said. So I'm not sure if that needed to be clarified, but I figured I'd clarify it just in case. So, yeah, that's going to be it, guys. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you guys learned something. And if you liked the video, leave a like, comment below, and subscribe. And if you didn't like the video, dislike it and comment below telling me what was wrong with it. Because I do read the comments. And I do take constructive criticism. So absolutely let me know down below if you agree with me, disagree with me. I don't know, you just don't like my hat or something. I don't care. I'll read it. But, yeah. Thanks for watching, everybody. I've been Gideon. I'll see you in the next one. Adios.